August 1943. The train rolled across sunlit fields, its wheels tapping rhythmically, like the heartbeat of a distant war. Inside the cars, there was a smell of metal, sweat, and dust. Outside the barred windows, yellow cornfields flashed by, along with occasional trees and crooked barns. The people inside were silent, tired, all wearing the same gray uniforms with black collar tabs and numbered patches. German prisoners of war, shipped across the ocean to a land they only knew from propaganda leaflets and rumors. Among them sat a worn-out guy of about 25, Wilhelm Krauss. Before the war, he'd been an apprentice baker in Hamburg. Now, a prisoner, with empty eyes reflecting the moving landscape outside. He clenched a crumpled piece of paper, an old letter from his mother, written in neat handwriting. "Be careful, Willie. People there hate us. Remember that." Soldiers whispered to each other. "The Americans shoot prisoners." One said quietly, "No, they make you dig graves," and then another cut himself off, glancing at a guard with a rifle by the door. Fear hung in the air thicker than dust. The train slowed. The screech of brakes, a short whistle, and silence. Outside, small houses appeared, a flag waving, and a sign, Hutchinson, Kansas. A dusty station. A dozen American soldiers, a few local farmers wearing hats. When the doors opened, the sun blinded them. Prisoners were led out 2 by 2, in a column. Nobody spoke, just the sound of boots on the wooden platform. And then Wilhelm saw her. She stood there, a woman in her early 30s, in a light dress, hair pinned up, eyes tired but not angry. She held a basket, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from beneath the cloth. She didn't hide her gaze, just looked at these enemies, the ones responsible for her husband's death at the front. The officer next to her said something, but she just shook her head and stepped closer to the column. One American guard frowned. "Ma'am, don't come too close." "It's just bread," she answered calmly. Prisoners froze. Someone smirked. "Probably poison." Another, older, muttered, "Or they just want to humiliate us." But she stepped closer and, without a word, set the basket on the ground. The wind lifted a corner of the cloth, and Wilhelm saw around, still warm loaves, smelling like home. She raised her eyes, and for a second met his gaze. No hate in them, just fatigue and something like pity. "Take it," she said in English. Then quietly, almost in a whisper, "You look hungry." Nobody moved, just the sound of the train pulling away and distant bird cries. For Wilhelm, time seemed to stop. He didn't understand why. Why was an enemy giving bread? Why? In a world where everything's burned and broken, could someone still do good? He stepped forward, hesitantly took a loaf, and thanked her in broken English. "Thank you, Frau." She nodded and turned away. He didn't know her name. Didn't know this meeting would change everything. The sun was already leaning towards sunset when the column of prisoners was led to the edge of town, to a makeshift camp, surrounded by a tall wooden fence topped with barbed wire. A sign on the gate read, "Camp 27, Prisoners of War." The Americans set up the camp quickly, using old warehouses and barns as stored grain. Now rows of iron cots stood inside, the air smelling of lime, sweat, and canned soup. There was a strange mix in the air, discipline and confusion. The guards, dressed in green, looked tired and not especially mean. They didn't shout or hit, but they stayed cold, precise. When the prisoners were assigned to barracks, Wilhelm quietly sank onto a cot. Sitting beside him was the older prisoner with graying temples, Erich Muller, a former schoolteacher from Cologne. He sighed, lit a hand-rolled cigarette, and whispered, careful not to let the guards hear, "Did you see the woman at the station?" Wilhelm nodded. "Thought I imagined it." "Nope. Real." And the bread was real. Eric gave a bitter smile. Strange country. Even the enemies feed the enemies. At night, the camp grew quiet. Somewhere beyond the fence, crickets chirped. The air smelled of wet earth and charcoal. Wilhelm couldn't sleep. Her face stayed in front of his eyes, calm, tired, without anger. He remembered his mother's hands, baking bread in the basement back in Hamburg while bombs fell. And now, here, on the other side of the world, someone handed him a warm loaf again, as if an invisible hand had stitched two wars together in one gesture. The next morning, the prisoners were taken out to work, pulling up potatoes, fixing the fence. The sun beat down, sweat stung their eyes. Corporal Thomas Reed, tall and red-haired, barked short orders. Keep moving, no talking, but without malice, just following instructions. By noon, the smell of bread returned to the camp, the same soft, homemade scent like childhood. The prisoners tensed, exchanging glances. At the gate, she appeared again, the same woman. This time she brought food in a large iron pot in an old truck. The camp officer, Lieutenant Daniel Harris, stepped out to meet her. "Ma'am, we appreciate your kindness, but these are enemy soldiers." She looked at him calmly. "I know who they are, Lieutenant, but they're still men. Men need food. Some people in town wouldn't agree with you. Some people lost sons too, Lieutenant." Her voice cracked a little. "I lost mine. But if I start hating everyone wearing a different uniform, what would be left of me?" Harris stayed silent, then nodded. "Fine, but stay outside the fence." The prisoners lined up at the gate. She placed bowls on benches, ladling soup from the pot. One of the Americans watching muttered, quietly, "Crazy lady." Feeding Nazis, she didn't respond, just looked at Wilhelm and smiled, a gentle, tired smile. He stepped closer, lowered his eyes, and whispered with an accent, "Why do you do this?" "We are enemies." She looked him straight in the eyes. "No, the war says we are. But I don't believe the war anymore." A hush fell over the camp. Even the guards seemed to hold their breath. For the first time in a long while, Wilhelm felt not humiliation but shame and gratitude, so sharp he wanted to lower his head and stay silent. When she left, the smell of bread and chicken broth lingered over the camp for a long while. Some prisoners laughed, others cried. Eric spoke quietly. "You know, Willie, if God were on earth, he'd probably look like her. A tired woman with bread." A week passed. The camp fell into its routine. Rise at 6, roll call, watery porridge for breakfast, farm work, evening check. Everything measured, even, as if no one noticed that these people had been shooting at each other not long ago. The Americans treated the prisoners with restraint. No cruelty, but no friendship either. They called them krauts, rough, but without much venom. Just a word, made habitual by war. Wilhelm quickly realized survival here meant not complaining, working, staying quiet, remembering he was no longer a soldier, just a number on a sleeve patch. But inside, a feeling grew that he couldn't name. Every evening, when the sun dropped behind the fence, he caught the smell of bread again, warm, homey, almost sacred. The woman, Mary Evans, as he later learned from Soldier Reed, came to the camp 3 times a week. She brought food, books, sometimes letters from townsfolk asking forgiveness for fear or rudeness. She always stayed on the other side of the barbed wire, but somehow it was like no wall existed between them. Wilhelm sometimes helped unload supplies, and every time their eyes met, time seemed to stop for a moment. He didn't understand what exactly was happening, but he felt this contact made him feel alive again. One day, when the afternoon leaned toward evening, rain began. Real, pouring rain with thunder and the smell of wet earth. Work was stopped. All prisoners were herded under a shelter. The guards went back to the barracks to dry their uniforms, leaving only one sleepy guy at the gate. Wilhelm sat by the wall, watching the rain streaks, when he heard a soft voice. "You'll catch cold, standing like that." He looked up. It was Mary, standing under an umbrella right by the fence. Wet hair clung to her face, fingers trembling from the cold, but in her eyes was something warm, untouchable by the storm. He stepped closer, stopped a few feet away, on opposite sides of the barbed wire. "You come even now?" he asked, struggling with his English. She smiled faintly. "Rain doesn't scare me. I've lived through worse." They stood silently. The rain muffled all other sounds, and it felt as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving only them and the cold wire between. Wilhelm stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "My mother, she also baked bread. Every Sunday. When bombs fell, She still baked. She said, "As long as bread exists, we are not animals." Mary lowered her eyes. "Your mother was right." Then added, "My husband, he used to say the same, before he went to France." She paused. Wilhelm understood without words. He didn't come back. Lightning lit the sky. For a second her face glowed, almost unreal. He wanted to speak, but couldn't. All he felt was a strange, quiet ache and gratitude. Mary stepped closer, took a small bundle from her bag, and placed it under the fence. "It's for you. Don't tell the guards." He picked up the bundle. Inside was a piece of bread and a folded note, in neat handwriting, for the one who still looks at people, not uniforms. She left in the rain, leaving him standing by the fence, hand shaking, lump in his throat. The bread smelled like home. The paper smelled of hope. That night, Wilhelm couldn't sleep. He stared at the note, thinking maybe God was in the sky, but in people who hadn't forgotten how to be human. Another week passed. Summer in Kansas hit hard. Hot, dusty, smelling of grass and overheated metal. The camp kept its rhythm. The prisoners already knew all the guards by their walk, knew when dinner would be served, when the supply truck would arrive, and on which days Mary Evans would come. Every time the engine roared at the gate, many prisoners' hearts skipped a beat, as if they weren't soldiers anymore, just people waiting for a kind word. Mary didn't bring pity. She brought human presence, rare, almost forbidden in those times. Wilhelm started helping in the camp kitchen. He volunteered, telling the guard he had been a baker before the war. So they let him near the flour, the dough, the hot oven air. At first, he just watched. Then he started kneading dough. By the end of the second week, he was baking simple loaves for the whole camp. It smelled like yeast, salt, hot air, smells that reminded him of home, his mother, pre-war mornings. While working, he realized bread was the only thing that made him feel alive. Sometimes in the evening, he wrote short notes, not letters, since sending them wasn't allowed. He scribbled on scraps of paper found in drawers and hid them between the slats of his bunk. One note began, "Mom, today I baked bread again, but not for our people, for those we call the enemy. And next to the camp lives a woman who does the same. She doesn't know who I am, but she seems to see me not as a prisoner, but just as a person. Sometimes I think if there were more people like her, maybe there would be no war at all." One evening, as the sun began to set, Mary appeared at the gate again. Wilhelm was washing pots at the time. Seeing her, he wiped his hands and went to the fence. The red-haired guard, Reed, lazily chewing on a match, waved. "You can talk, baker boy. Just stay on your side." Mary smiled, tired, warm smile. "They told me you're the one baking the bread now." "Yes," Wilhelm nodded. "I try. Like my mother. Smells better than the army rations, that's for sure." He blushed, looking down. "You know, I didn't think Americans could smell like home." She raised an eyebrow in surprise. "And what does home smell like to you?" "Like bread and rain and forgiveness." She was quiet, a long silence. Then she said, "Forgiveness is hard, but someone has to start." At that moment, the same heavy silence settled between them, thick as warm air after the rain. No loud words, no confessions, just two people, separated by barbed wire and war, but united by the smell of bread and memories of home. The next day, a small incident happened in the camp. One prisoner, drunk from stolen spirits, threw a stone at a guard. The Americans quickly put down the disturbance, but the tension rose. Lieutenant Harris banned Mary from coming during the investigation. She didn't show up the next day, or the day after. The camp seemed to sink into gray silence. Even the bread seemed to lose its smell. Wilhelm couldn't stand it. That night, he grabbed a sheet of paper and wrote a short letter, not expecting it to ever reach her. "Miss Evans, when you don't come, it gets cold here. Not from the wind, from the fading belief. I don't know how long this war will last, but if it ever ends, I want you to know, thanks to you, I've stopped hating." He didn't know how to deliver it. But in the morning, when Reed came to check the kitchen, Wilhelm simply placed a note on the edge of the table and said, "If you see her, give this." Reed looked at him, then at the note, and after a short pause, took it. "You Germans sure talk too much about feelings." Maybe we learned too late, Wilhelm replied. The letter reached her, and that evening, when the smell of bread returned and the camp gate creaked from the familiar truck, everyone realized she was back. The truck entered the camp in the evening, the sun low on the horizon, painting everything in soft golden light. The air was thick and warm, smelling of bread and dust. The prisoners turned their heads almost in unison, as if they had been waiting for this moment all week. Mary stepped out of the cab. She wore a simple dress, slightly streaked with flour, hair tied in a bun, her face showing fatigue, but her eyes the same gentle warmth. She looked like someone tired of the war, but unwilling to harden her heart. Lieutenant Harris approached first. "Mrs. Evans, I told you to wait for clearance." "I did wait," she replied calmly. "A week. That's enough for people who haven't eaten hope for months." He wanted to argue, but waved his hand. "Fine, but stay close to the gate." Mary nodded and opened the back of the truck. Inside were boxes of bread, some canned stewed vegetables, everything she had managed to gather from homes. She served the food with 2 local women, then, as usual, waited a bit while the prisoners ate. Wilhelm sat on a bench by the fence, bowl in hand. When Mary approached, he stood, hesitant, as if fearing that a single word might break the fragile balance. "You got my letter?" "I did." She looked at him. "And you shouldn't have written it. It could have caused trouble." "I know." He lowered his head. "But silence hurts more." She paused for a moment, the wind shifting strands of her hair. "It was beautiful," she whispered. "And sad." He nodded. "Everything we write now is sad, because we live between guilt and gratitude." Mary looked over the camp, at the people behind the wire, at the guards by the gate. "When the war ends," she said, "you'll go home. You'll tell your people what happened here, that not everyone hated you. And you? What will you do?" "I'll stay. I have nowhere to go. My husband is gone. My son, too." He wanted to say something, but words stuck in his throat. She turned to leave, then stopped and asked, "What was your life before all this? Before the uniform?" "I baked bread in Hamburg. My father's shop. The bombs destroyed it. Then they took me. The army. I never wanted to fight. Most men didn't." When she left, silence returned to the camp. But inside Wilhelm, something had changed. For the first time in captivity, he looked forward to someone. Not liberation, not the end of the war, but her. Every day he baked bread, and in each loaf tried to say what words could not. He kneaded the dough carefully, as if praying, the smell of fresh bread rising over the camp, mingling with dust and smoke. Even the American guards started seeing him differently, with respect. "Reed," the red-haired corporal, once said, "You know, Kraus, your bread makes the guards less angry." Wilhelm smiled. "Bread does that. It's like peace, simple, but hard to keep warm for long." Meanwhile, whispers began spreading in town. People saw Widow Evans bringing food to the prisoner camp. Some thanked her, others whispered behind her back. "Crazy, feeding killers. Her husband died in Europe, and she feeds those who might have killed him." Mary knew. Each visit to the gate grew harder for her, but she still came. She told herself, "If I stop coming, the war wins me a second time." One evening, Wilhelm wrote another letter, not to send, just to keep from losing his mind. "Miss Evans, today I realize that the bread we bake isn't just food. It's a language spoken by those who don't know how to forgive with words. I don't ask forgiveness for what my people have done, but I'm grateful you haven't forgotten what it means to be human." He folded the paper and tucked it under his mattress. That night he couldn't sleep. He thought of her as home, and how war turns hearts to ashes. Yet sometimes from those ashes, something warm and real can grow. The next morning, the guards announced a visit from a military commission from Washington. The prisoners had to look presentable, and outsiders, including civilians, were not allowed in. Wilhelm immediately knew Mary wouldn't come, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly empty. The morning was stifling and sticky. The camp air hung still, as if the heat itself pressed the ground to sky. Prisoners were woken earlier than usual. Everything had to be by the book. Clean uniforms ordered in the barracks, straight lines. American soldiers ran between tents, adding polish no one needed, except for the papers and photos for the report. By noon, 2 jeeps rolled into the camp. Out stepped 3 military men in crisp white shirts and a woman with glasses and a notebook, a Red Cross representative. Her name was Miss Harper. She spoke softly with a northern accent and, surprisingly, looked at the prisoners not as enemies, but as people. Lieutenant Harris escorted her around the camp, showing the kitchens, the medical station, the rest area. When they reached the bakery, Wilhelm was taking loaves out of the oven. Warm bread lined the wooden tables, steam rising, filling the room with the scent of childhood, home, and peace. Miss Harper smiled. "Who bakes this?" Harris nodded toward Wilhelm. "That one. German. Used to be a baker before the war. He's good," she said, inhaling the aroma. "Reminds me of Boston." Harris chuckled. "Guess good bread doesn't care about borders." Wilhelm stood silently, trying not to look at them, but inside he was boiling. From the moment a commission entered, he couldn't stop thinking. What if they decide to transfer the camp? To another state, or worse, back to Europe? He hadn't said everything he wanted, hadn't even properly thanked Mary. After the inspection, the prisoners were released for a short break. The Americans gathered in the administrative tent, discussing reports. Wilhelm sat on a box near the kitchen, watching the road outside the fence. Fields and sparse trees stretched in the distance. He caught every sound, every rustle, as if waiting for her. And then the hum of an engine. He rose, heart thumping in his chest. But it wasn't Mary's truck. It was another vehicle, small, dusty. Out came a local farmer with a crate of eggs. Disappointment hit him like cold water. Meanwhile, Miss Harper flipped through papers in the tent. "Your camp looks humane," she said. "I've seen worse. Much worse." Harris shrugged. "We try. These men are done fighting. No point in cruelty. Still," she added, "I heard stories about a local woman who brings food here. That true?" He nodded. "Mary Evans. Widow. Lost husband in Normandy. And you allow it? Officially?" "No. But unofficially. Who am I to stop someone from being kind?" She studied him, then wrote something in her notebook. "Kindness in war is the rarest thing. Lieutenant, don't kill it, even by rules." In the evening, as the sun sank and the camp settled, the guards allowed the prisoners a little time by the fence to breathe. Wilhelm sat, staring at the road, no longer hoping to see the familiar figure. But in the distance, 2 headlights flickered. A vehicle approached slowly, crawling through the evening dust. He stood, squinting, heart tightening. It was her truck. Mary stepped out, carrying a basket of bread. This time, her expression was different. Not just tired, but closed off, as if something gnawed at her inside. She approached the fence and set down the basket. "You weren't supposed to come today," Reed said, arms crossed. "I know, but I couldn't stay home." She looked at Wilhelm. "They told me officials came. I thought maybe they'd send you away." "Not yet," he replied, "but I don't know for how long." She stayed silent, then pulled a small envelope from her pocket, sealed with wax. "Here. What is it?" "A letter. For you. But don't open it now." He took the envelope, fingers trembling. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything. Don't thank me. Just stay human, Wilhelm. That's all that matters now." They stood quietly, the wind rustling the wire. When she left, he watched her figure fade, wanting to remember every detail, every movement. That night, under the dim lamp in the barracks, he broke the seal of the envelope. Inside was a short letter. "You once said bread smells like forgiveness. Maybe you're right. If someday you come back, not as a soldier, not as a prisoner, there'll still be bread waiting for you." He read the words over and over, then carefully folded the paper and tucked it with the others, his unsent, unfinished letters. But this time he didn't cry. He just smiled, quietly, barely noticeable, because for the first time in a long while, he believed that war could leave a taste of bread, not just blood. The night was stifling and still. The camp seemed frozen, listening to the crickets and the creak of wooden structures. Wilhelm sat on his bunk, holding a freshly baked loaf, smelling of flour and salt. He thought of Mary's letter. Her words wouldn't leave his mind. Stay human, Wilhelm. That's all that matters now. He closed his eyes and suddenly saw everything that had happened over the past months. The smell of dust, the sound of trains, the faces of prisoners, the faces of Americans, the scent of bread, and the rain on the station platform. And suddenly it all blended together. Fear, guilt, gratitude, homesickness. He realized that military uniforms and barbed wire couldn't hide what remained human inside him. The next day, the camp buzzed with tension. One of the prisoners, Hans, tried to steal some food from the kitchen to sell on the black market in town. The guards noticed and confronted him. Wilhelm watched from a distance. He knew if he intervened, his bread and efforts could lose meaning. If he didn't, someone else would suffer. He quietly approached Hans. "Leave it. Not worth it. They'll starve me," Hans shouted. "We all starve if we lose trust." Hans fell silent. His eyes were full of fear and hurt. Wilhelm realized that trust was fragile, like fresh-baked bread. Later, when the camp had emptied and prisoners lined up for evening roll call, he spotted Mary in the distance. She stood by the gate with a basket of bread, but her face carried worry. Something was clearly wrong. When she approached, Wilhelm asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just—" She paused, looking at the sky. "The war is closer than we think." At that moment, the mail arrived, letters, parcels, news from Europe. Among them was an envelope for Wilhelm. He opened it and felt a chill down his spine, a letter from his mother. "Willie, your father has passed. I'm alone now. I don't know if I can survive this. But remember, even if you're a prisoner, you're still my son. Take care of yourself." Wilhelm sank onto the bench. His heart ached as if pierced by 1,000 needles. He thought of Mary, of bread, of hope, of guilt. He understood that real war wasn't just battles and bullets. It was a fight inside yourself. In the evening, Mary approached the fence. She noticed his gaze, full of pain and exhaustion. "I heard news?" she asked cautiously. He nodded, clenching his hands. "My father gone." She placed her palm on the fence, as if trying to pass warmth through the cold metal. "I'm sorry, Wilhelm. I know words are empty now." He looked at her, and for the first time, he felt he could trust someone beyond the barbed wire, thousands of miles from home. "Bread," he whispered. "Your bread saved me. Not just the food, you saved me." She nodded. "We save each other in the little ways, Wilhelm. That's all we have left." The night swallowed the camp. Wilhelm sat on the bench, holding a fresh loaf, listening to the wind mix with distant bird calls. He realized he no longer thought of the war as a simple clash of nations. He thought of people, of trust, of the fact that even an enemy could be a friend if someone chooses to see them as human. And somewhere out there, past the barbed wire, Mary whispered words that didn't reach the soldiers' ears, but they reached the heart. Storm clouds hung over the camp, first gray, then almost black, like the sky itself was ready to remind everyone that war was everywhere, even here, among the cornfields of Kansas. The wind carried dust and dry leaves. Soldiers ran across the camp, reinforcing temporary fences, preparing for a possible inspection. Wilhelm stood by the kitchen, drying his hands with a towel. He could hear the distant rumble, the approaching storm. He thought of his mother's letter and of Mary coming again today. His heart beat faster. Every truck engine, every squeak of wheels, felt like a signal that someone was bringing hope. Soon, right on schedule, Mary pulled up to the camp. But this time, she looked worried. Tired streaks marked her face, and her hands trembled. "The storm! It's coming sooner than expected," she said, approaching the fence. "And they might inspect the road." I had to rush. Wilhelm noticed a shake in her fingers, but also determination in her eyes. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll manage. Bread will survive." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. She knew that behind the calm, the chaos of war could destroy every moment of warmth they were trying to keep alive. That day, the prisoners worked faster than usual. Wilhelm kneaded dough, thinking about how fast the world could change. Yesterday's enemies could be tomorrow's allies, and small gestures, bread or a smile, could be the only shield against despair. Next to him stood Hans, the one who had tried to steal food. This time he was silent, and Wilhelm saw shame and understanding in his eyes. "I didn't know we could," Hans began. "Be human?" Wilhelm finished. "We can, if someone shows us the way." Hans nodded, eyes down, and for the first time, Wilhelm felt that small lessons in humanity reached further than war could. Meanwhile, the storm grew stronger. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the barracks and fences. A young American soldier ran to the animal pen to protect the animals from the wind and rain. Wilhelm glanced at Mary. She stood by the gate with a basket, like a statue in the middle of a storm. "Come inside," he shouted, but she just nodded, refusing to leave. "I have to finish what I started," she said, looking at him with resolve. Then Wilhelm realized, being human is not safe. It's risky, and she was risking it for all of them. When the storm reached full force, they stood on opposite sides of the fence, the rain mixing their smells, the wind and thunder surrounding them. Wilhelm reached his hand across the wire, as if to touch the warmth she brought. "We'll survive this, too," he said over the noise. "Together," she replied quietly. And in that moment, as lightning lit up the camp, both of them realized the power of small gestures was stronger than any battle in the world. The morning came foggy, like nature itself was warning of changes ahead. The mist spread over the fields, hiding the corn and camp barracks in a gray veil. The prisoners woke with strange scents. Something in the air whispered a change. Wilhelm struggled to keep his hand steady. He held a fresh loaf, warm, smelling of flour and salt, like a small thread of hope amidst the war. That day, Mary arrived earlier than usual. Her face had a worried shade, eyes shining, hands gripping the basket of bread a little tighter than normal. "Wilhelm," she said, approaching the fence. "I'm not sure how long I can keep coming." He felt his chest tighten. "Why?" "Because the town is talking. Some people don't understand. And if they complain, the officers might stop me." He lowered his gaze, holding the loaf, and quietly said, "Then let's make today count." They both knew this could be the last day when their small world wasn't broken by war and mistrust. The prisoners lined up at the gate. Wilhelm helped Mary hand out bread and soup, feeling every bowl, every loaf, become an act of resistance, not with weapons, but with humanity. He caught every look, every smile, every word of thanks. Some prisoners cried, others laughed softly, but no one felt like just a number or an enemy anymore. Just as it seemed the world had paused, a military inspection arrived. Soldiers with rifles, officers with stern faces. Mary froze. Wilhelm stepped forward to shield her with his gaze, knowing he could do nothing else. "Mrs. Evans," said one officer sternly, "this is not allowed. They're starving, and hungry people are dangerous." She replied calmly, "I bring them hope." In that moment, something changed. Even the strictest officers seemed to see not prisoners, but people, not enemies, but life. No one interfered. When the inspection left, Mary stood quietly by the gate, leaning on her basket. Wilhelm approached and placed his hand on the wire between them. "You risk so much for us." "I risk little compared to what you survived." He looked at her and finally dared. I don't know if I can ever repay you." She smiled, tired but warm. "Just live, Wilhelm." That's enough. That day they stood silently, and time seemed to stop. A moment of humanity, slipping through the darkness of war. Night fell over the camp. Wilhelm sat again on the bench, holding a fresh loaf, reading letters from his mother, from Mary, his own. He realized the war had taken much, but not everything. It hadn't taken the chance to be human. And somewhere beyond the fence, over the distant sounds of wind and crickets, Wilhelm heard Mary's soft whisper, "We're still alive, Wilhelm." And that's everything. The sun was already tilting toward the horizon, bathing the camp in gentle golden light. The fields around shimmered in the fog, like they reflected the remnants of war and the quiet life still clinging to every moment. Wilhelm stood by the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. On the table were fresh loaves, steaming like little symbols of humanity. He thought about everything that had happened over the past months. Fear, hunger, letters, rain on the station platform, laughter, tears. Most of all, Mary, the woman who showed that even in war, warmth was possible. Mary arrived that day as always, but there was no worry on her face, only quiet fatigue and gentle determination. "Wilhelm," she said, smiling, "today I bring enough bread, enough for everyone." He nodded, feeling his heart filled with a strange mix of joy and sorrow. The prisoners lined up at the gate. Each received their portion, but no one rushed to eat it. They looked at each other, at Mary, at Wilhelm. At that moment, there were no enemies or allies, only people. After handing out the bread, Mary came to the fence and handed Wilhelm a small bundle. "Open it later," she said softly. He nodded, tucking the bundle under his jacket. When the truck drove away, he opened it. Inside was a short note. "Wilhelm, you've proven that humanity is stronger than fear. Bread is more than food. It's hope, live so that it never fades." He smiled, feeling tears prick his eyes. At that moment, he realized war could take everything, homeland, family, friends, but the humanity they gave each other would remain forever. That evening, the camp fell silent. Wilhelm sat on the bench, holding a fresh loaf, gazing at the stars. He remembered all the letters, the smell of bread, the rain at the station, Mary and her smile. And for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Somewhere beyond the fence, Mary's shadow flickered. She was heading home. But Wilhelm knew. Through bread, letters, and small acts of kindness, they had changed each other forever. The war wasn't over yet. But amid the chaos and pain, they had found humanity. And that was enough to hope for the future. The end.
One story has ended, but there are many more to come. Subscribe to stay up to date with the next story.